Sometimes the person who changes your life forever is the one you left behind in the snow. The storm rolled across northern Colorado like a living thing, swallowing the highway in sheets of white and turning the world beyond the windshield into a blur of frozen darkness. Claire Bennett tightened both hands around the steering wheel of her aging blue Ford Taurus, her knuckles pale from tension as the engine coughed again. "Come on." "Please not now," she whispered, glancing toward the back seat where her 8-year-old son lay curled beneath a faded gray blanket. Noah's small chest rose unevenly, the sound of his breathing soft but strained. The little inhaler beside him had almost run empty 2 days ago, and the pharmacy in town had closed before she finished her second shift at the diner. A sharp warning light flashed across the dashboard. Then another. Claire's stomach dropped. The heater died first. Cold air flooded the car within seconds. "Mom." Noah's sleepy voice cracked through the silence. "Are we almost home?" Claire forced a smile he couldn't see. "Almost, baby." But then the engine gave one final violent shudder before the car rolled helplessly onto the shoulder of the highway. Snow hammered against the windows. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one, trying not to panic. She reached for her phone. No signal. Of course. Outside, the wind screamed across the empty road. One car passed. Then another. Headlights rushed by without slowing down. Claire stepped out into the storm anyway, wrapping her thin coat tighter around herself as freezing snow soaked instantly into her boots. She pushed against the trunk with all the strength left in her body, trying to move the dead car farther from the road. It barely budged. Her breath shook in white clouds. Her fingers burned from the cold. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please." Then suddenly, headlights slowed behind her. Not just any headlights. Bright white beams cut through the storm before a black Rolls-Royce eased onto the shoulder beside her. Expensive. Impossibly expensive. The engine purred softly even beneath the wind. Claire froze. The driver's door opened slowly, and a tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal wool coat dusted with snow. Broad shoulders. Dark hair touched by winter frost. Calm, controlled movements. The kind of man who looked like he belonged in Manhattan boardrooms, not stranded on a frozen highway. Without saying a word, he walked past Claire and immediately looked toward the back seat. Noah coughed weakly inside the car. The stranger removed his coat instantly and opened the rear door, draping the warm fabric gently over the boy before kneeling beside him. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "You doing okay back there?" Noah nodded tiredly. "Little cold. We'll fix that." His voice was low, steady, familiar. Too familiar. Claire stared at him through the falling snow as something inside her chest tightened painfully. No, it couldn't be. The man stood again, brushing snow from his hands before finally turning toward her fully. Their eyes met beneath the glow of the storm lights. And suddenly the world seemed to stop moving. Ethan Walker. 9 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. Claire forgot the cold, forgot the highway, forgot how to breathe. Because standing in front of her was the man who had once promised he would love her forever, before vanishing from her life without a goodbye. For a second, neither of them moved. Snow spiraled between them beneath the pale highway lights, while memories Claire had spent years trying to bury came rushing back all at once. Ethan standing outside her college dorm with coffee at 6 in the morning. Ethan teaching her how to drive stick shift in his old pickup truck. Ethan laughing with his forehead pressed against hers under summer fireworks beside the lake. And then the last memory of all. An empty apartment. A disconnected phone number. Silence. Ethan stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. Claire. Her name left his lips slowly, almost painfully. She swallowed hard and looked away first. "You should not be here." The words came out colder than she intended, but it was the only way to stop her hands from shaking. Ethan glanced toward Noah inside the car again before focusing back on her. "Your son needs to get warm." Claire opened her mouth to argue, but another rough cough came from the back seat. That sound decided everything. Ethan moved immediately toward the hood of the Taurus, rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt despite the freezing wind. Expensive watch. Polished shoes now buried in slush. None of it seemed to matter to him. Claire watched silently as he inspected the engine with a flashlight from his car. "Radiator line froze," he said calmly. "Battery is almost dead too. Can it be fixed?" "Not tonight." He shut the hood gently. "There is a motel about 12 miles from here. I can drive you both." Claire crossed her arms tightly. We are fine. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes softer than she remembered. Claire, he said quietly, your son is shivering. The old version of herself almost broke right there. The girl who used to trust him with everything. But 9 years changes people. 9 years teaches survival. Before she could answer, Noah pushed the blanket aside and peeked toward Ethan through the half-open window. Mom, he whispered. Is he a firefighter? Ethan smiled faintly. No, buddy. Then why are you helping us? The question hit harder than Ethan expected. Claire saw it in his face instantly. He crouched beside the window again until he was eye level with Noah. Because somebody should. Noah studied him seriously for a second before nodding. Okay, I like you. Claire almost laughed despite herself. Ethan's smile deepened for the first time that night. I am honored. 20 minutes later, snow crunched beneath the tires of Ethan's Rolls-Royce as they drove through the storm toward the nearest town. Warm air filled the cabin. Soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. Noah had fallen asleep in the back seat wrapped in Ethan's coat. His small face finally relaxed. Claire sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out at the snow-covered pine trees racing past the window. The silence between them felt crowded with unfinished sentences. Ethan finally spoke first. I looked for you. Claire's jaw tightened immediately. Do not. Claire, you do not get to say that now. Her voice cracked before she could stop it. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter. One day you were gone. No note. No explanation. I thought something happened to you. Claire let out a quiet laugh that sounded nothing like humor. Something did happen to me. Ethan glanced toward her, but she refused to look back at him. The windshield wipers swept rhythmically across the glass as the storm thickened around them. Then suddenly Noah stirred in the back seat. Half asleep, he mumbled softly beneath Ethan's coat. Mom, who is Ethan? The car went completely silent. Claire closed her eyes instantly, because Noah had never heard that name before. Claire opened her eyes slowly, her heartbeat suddenly loud inside the warm silence of the car. Snow continued falling beyond the windshield, soft and endless beneath the glow of distant highway lights. Ethan looked at her once, confused by the tension that instantly filled the air. Noah shifted sleepily under the coat again. Mom. Claire forced herself to breathe normally before turning halfway toward the back seat. Go back to sleep, baby. Noah rubbed his eyes. But you said his name. Ethan kept his attention on the road, but Claire noticed the slight tightening in his jaw. He heard it too. Every word. He helped us tonight, Claire said carefully. That is all. Noah accepted the answer easier than Ethan did. Within minutes, the little boy drifted back to sleep, one hand still clutching the edge of the expensive wool coat wrapped around him. Ethan finally spoke again, quieter this time. He has your eyes. Claire stared out the window. A lot of children do. Ethan almost smiled at the deflection, but sadness settled over his face instead. The motel appeared another 10 minutes later beside a gas station and a closed diner buried in snow. The flickering neon sign buzzed weakly through the storm. Ethan parked near the entrance and stepped out immediately, hurrying around the car before Claire could protest. He opened Noah's door carefully and lifted the sleeping boy into his arms with surprising gentleness. Claire froze again, watching them together beneath the snowfall. Noah instinctively rested his head against Ethan's shoulder like it belonged there. Like somehow children always know. Ethan glanced toward her softly. Which room? Claire swallowed the strange ache rising in her chest and followed him inside. The motel lobby smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. A tired woman behind the counter barely looked up from her television while Ethan paid for the room without hesitation. Claire reached for her purse immediately. I can pay for my own room. Claire, I mean it. Ethan handed the clerk his black credit card anyway. You can yell at me tomorrow. 20 minutes later, Noah was asleep beneath thick blankets while an old heater rattled loudly near the window. Claire stood beside the bathroom sink staring at her reflection. Damp hair, exhausted eyes. A life that looked nothing like the future she once imagined at 24 years old. She splashed cold water against her face before hearing a soft knock at the door. Ethan, of course. Claire hesitated before opening it halfway. Ethan stood outside, holding a small paper bag from the gas station downstairs. They only had sandwiches and crackers. You did not have to do that. I know. His voice was calm, familiar in the worst possible way. Claire took the bag slowly. Their fingers brushed for half a second. Dangerous. Ethan looked past her toward Noah, sleeping peacefully inside the room. Does he always breathe like that? Concern filled his voice instantly. Claire leaned against the door frame. Asthma. Cold weather makes it worse. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing every detail like it mattered deeply to him already. Does he have a doctor? A clinic in town. And the inhaler? Claire looked away. Silence answered for her. Ethan's expression changed immediately. Not pity. Something heavier. Regret maybe. Claire, he said softly. You should have called me. She let out a quiet laugh that sounded tired more than angry. 9 years ago. Ethan did not answer. Because there was no answer good enough. Snow tapped gently against the motel window behind her, while old memories hung unfinished between them. Ethan finally reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out his wallet. For one brief second, Claire saw something faded tucked behind the leather card slots. A photograph. Small. Worn. Familiar. Ethan noticed her staring, and instinctively closed the wallet again too fast. But not before Claire recognized exactly what she had seen. Half of an old Polaroid picture from the summer they fell in love beside Silver Lake. Claire stood frozen in the motel doorway long after Ethan walked away down the snow-covered balcony. The paper bag of food hung loosely in her hand while her mind replayed the image she had seen inside his wallet over and over again. Half of a Polaroid. The same Polaroid she had once torn apart herself beside Silver Lake 9 years ago, while crying so hard she could barely breathe. One half stayed with her. The other half had disappeared with Ethan. Or so she thought. Slowly, Claire closed the motel door and leaned against it. The heater rattled softly nearby. Noah slept curled beneath the blankets with Ethan's coat still wrapped around his small shoulders. For a moment, Claire simply watched her son breathe. The rise and fall of his chest. The same dark eyelashes Ethan had. The same stubborn little crease between his eyebrows whenever he slept. She had spent years convincing herself that keeping Noah away from the Walker family was the right thing to do. Safe. Necessary. But seeing Ethan tonight had cracked something open she could not close again. Noah stirred slightly beneath the blankets. Mom. Claire crossed the room immediately and sat beside him. I am here. His sleepy eyes blinked open halfway. Is the snow still bad? Pretty bad. Noah looked down at the oversized charcoal coat covering him. The man is nice. Claire smiled faintly despite herself. Yeah, she whispered. He used to be. Noah traced the sleeve of the coat with his fingers before suddenly reaching into the pocket. There is something in here. Claire frowned as Noah pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper. Old. Worn at the edges. Before she could stop him, he unfolded it carefully. Claire's breath caught instantly. It was a receipt from a diner in Boulder dated almost 10 years earlier. At the bottom, in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. Still my favorite girl in the world. Claire closed her eyes painfully, because she remembered that night exactly. 23 years old. Cheap burgers. Shared milkshake. Ethan laughing while snow fell outside the diner windows. She had forgotten almost everything else from that year except how safe she felt with him. Noah looked up curiously. You know his handwriting? Claire gently took the paper from him. Get some sleep, baby. But Noah was too observant for his age. Too smart. Did you know him before? Claire hesitated too long. And children always notice silence more than words. A long time ago, she admitted quietly. Noah studied her face carefully. Did he make you sad? The question hit harder than she expected. Claire brushed Noah's hair back softly. Sometimes people can love each other very much and still hurt each other. Noah considered that seriously in the way only children do. That sounds dumb. Claire laughed unexpectedly. A real laugh this time. Small. Fragile. Yeah, she whispered. It kind of is. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Claire's smile faded immediately. She opened the door slowly to find Ethan standing there again, snow dusting his dark sweater now that he no longer wore the coat. His hair was damp from the storm. He looked colder somehow, without the sharp billionaire image surrounding him. More human. More dangerous. Ethan held up a small white pharmacy bag. I found a 24-hour pharmacy 2 towns over. Claire stared at the inhaler inside the bag. Her throat tightened instantly. Ethan, the pharmacist said this brand works faster during winter flare-ups. Noah's eyes widened from the bed. You drove in the storm for me. Ethan looked almost embarrassed by the attention. It was not that far. Claire knew the nearest open pharmacy was over 30 miles away. Ethan stepped inside slowly and handed the bag to her. Their fingers touched again briefly. Warm this time. Familiar. Noah suddenly smiled from the bed. Mom, he whispered loudly. I think he likes us. Ethan looked down instantly, hiding a faint smile, while Claire felt her entire chest tighten with fear. Because Noah had no idea how dangerous it was to let Ethan Walker matter again. The storm finally eased sometime after midnight, leaving the world outside buried beneath fresh snow. And silence. Inside the motel room, the heater hummed steadily while Noah sat cross-legged on the bed, wearing Ethan's oversized coat like a blanket cape. Claire stood near the tiny coffee maker pretending to organize sugar packets while secretly watching Ethan from the corner of her eye. He sat in the old armchair near the window, sleeves rolled up, helping Noah build a small toy truck out of crackers, napkins, and plastic utensils from the gas station food bag. That wheel is crooked, Noah announced seriously. Ethan leaned back with mock offense. Excuse me, sir, I used to build prototype race cars when I was your age. Noah narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Really? No, Ethan admitted. But it sounded impressive. Noah burst into laughter so suddenly that Claire almost forgot to be careful. Almost. Because seeing them together felt too natural. Too easy. Like watching a life that was never supposed to happen. Ethan glanced toward Claire briefly as Noah continued talking nonstop about school, comic books, and his dream of owning a garage one day. That look lasted less than 2 seconds, but Claire remembered it instantly. Ethan used to look at her exactly like that whenever he thought she was not paying attention. Soft. Quiet. Like she mattered more than everything else in the room. Mom says old cars have souls, Noah said proudly while adjusting the toy truck. Ethan smiled faintly. Your mom always loved broken things. The second the words left his mouth, silence filled the room. Claire stopped moving entirely. Ethan realized what he had said too late. Noah looked between them curiously. You really knew each other a long time ago. Claire grabbed the coffee cup too quickly. Noah, you should sleep. I am not tired. You were coughing an hour ago. Noah sighed dramatically and slid beneath the blankets anyway. Ethan stood slowly from the chair. I should go. Claire nodded too fast. Yeah. But Noah immediately looked disappointed. Do you have to? Ethan glanced at him with something unreadable in his expression. Probably. Noah hesitated before quietly asking, will you come back tomorrow? Claire's chest tightened instantly. Ethan looked toward her. First this time, waiting. Always careful around the boundaries she kept building between them. Claire should have said no. She should have ended this tonight before old memories became dangerous again. But Noah was smiling for the first time in weeks. Really smiling. And she had forgotten how much she missed hearing that sound. If the road's clear, Claire said softly, avoiding Ethan's eyes. Maybe. Noah grinned immediately. Good. Ethan looked almost surprised by her answer. Then slowly, very carefully, he nodded. Then I will come back. An hour later, Claire finally managed to get Noah asleep again. The motel room had gone quiet except for the soft rattling heater and distant wind outside. Claire sat alone near the window holding the faded diner receipt Ethan accidentally left behind earlier. Her thumb traced the old handwriting slowly. Still my favorite girl in the world. Tears threatened unexpectedly, and Claire shut her eyes hard. She hated that part of herself still reacted to him after all these years. Hated that one night was enough to crack open wounds she spent nearly a decade sealing shut. Then her phone buzzed suddenly on the nightstand. Unknown number. Claire frowned before answering carefully. Hello. A cold female voice responded instantly. Ms. Bennett. Claire sat up straighter. Who is this? My name is Victoria Walker. Ethan's mother. Claire's blood turned cold immediately. 9 years disappeared in one heartbeat. The woman's voice remained smooth and elegant on the other end of the line. I heard my son found you tonight. Claire could barely breathe. Because there was only one reason Victoria Walker would ever contact her again. And none of them were good. Claire could not speak for several seconds. She sat frozen on the edge of the motel bed while snow drifted silently beyond the dark window, and Noah slept only a few feet away. The voice on the phone sounded exactly the same as it had 9 years ago. Controlled. Elegant. Dangerous in the quietest way possible. How did you get this number? Claire whispered finally. Victoria Walker gave a soft, amused hum. You know our family has never struggled to find people. Claire closed her eyes. Briefly. Of course. Some things never changed. What do you want? I think we both know the answer to that. Claire's grip tightened around the phone. Ethan does not know. No. Victoria replied calmly. But he will. Panic flashed through Claire instantly. She stood and walked quietly into the motel bathroom, shutting the door before speaking again. You promised you would leave us alone. And you promised you would stay away from my son. The old fear came rushing back so fast, it almost made Claire dizzy. 9 years ago, she had been 25, terrified, pregnant, and completely alone when Victoria Walker arrived at her apartment in Denver wearing pearls and a perfectly tailored cream coat. Claire still remembered every word from that meeting. Ethan has a future bigger than this. Bigger than you. If you truly love him, you will walk away now before you destroy everything he has worked for. At the time, Ethan had just been named the youngest executive in Walker Dynamics history. Newspapers called him America's next billionaire visionary. Investors watched his every move. The Walker family treated love like weakness and public image like religion. Claire had not stood a chance. You disappeared before Ethan could choose for himself. Victoria continued smoothly. That was wise. Claire forced herself to stay calm. Why are you calling now? Silence stretched briefly on the other end. Then Victoria spoke again, colder this time. Because my son is already making emotional decisions again. And emotional decisions are dangerous for men like Ethan. Claire looked toward the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the exhausted woman staring back at her. Noah is not a business risk. No, Victoria said softly. He is leverage. Claire's stomach dropped instantly. Do not talk about my son. Then listen carefully. Victoria's voice remained perfectly composed. Walker Dynamics is entering the largest merger in company history next month. Ethan cannot afford scandal right now. Certainly not one involving a secret child. Claire's chest tightened painfully. Secret child. The words sounded cruel, even though they were true. You do not get to decide what happens. Anymore, Claire whispered. Actually, Victoria replied quietly, I usually do. The line went dead. Claire stared at the phone in horror for several seconds before lowering it slowly. Her hands trembled again the same way they had the night she left Denver carrying 2 suitcases and a positive pregnancy test hidden inside her purse. Back then she thought leaving Ethan would protect him. Protect Noah too. But now she was no longer sure who she had really been protecting all these years. A soft knock sounded suddenly at the motel door outside the bathroom. Claire's heartbeat jumped immediately. Ethan's voice came through softly. Claire. She inhaled sharply and stepped back into the room. Ethan stood near the doorway holding 2 paper coffee cups from the gas station next door. His hair was damp from melted snow and dark circles rested beneath his eyes like he had not slept at all. I saw the bathroom light, he said gently. I thought maybe you were awake. Claire stared at him silently. He looked so different from the man his mother described. Not cold, not calculating, just tired, concerned, human. Ethan held out one of the coffee cups awkwardly. Still too much cream and 1 sugar? Claire's breath caught painfully, because that used to be her order. Every single morning. She took the cup slowly without answering. Ethan studied her face carefully. Something is wrong. Claire looked away immediately. No, Ethan stepped closer. Claire. The way he said her name nearly broke her all over again. Soft. Familiar. Like no time had passed at all. Then suddenly Noah's sleepy voice drifted across the room. Mom. Both of them turned instantly. Noah sat up slowly in bed, rubbing his eyes, while Ethan's coat slipped from his shoulders. I had a bad dream. Ethan moved toward him automatically without thinking. Natural. Protective. Instinctive. And Claire realized with sudden terrifying clarity that Ethan Walker was already beginning to love a child he did not even know was his. Noah lifted his arms sleepily the moment Ethan approached the bed, and something inside Claire's chest tightened painfully watching Ethan instinctively tuck the blankets around him with careful hands. Bad dream? Ethan asked softly. Noah nodded. The car disappeared, and Mom was crying. Ethan glanced toward Claire for 1 brief second before looking back at the little boy. Well, he said quietly, the car is still ugly, but it is definitely still there. Noah giggled tiredly beneath the blankets. Mom says ugly cars build character. Your mom says a lot of dangerous things. Claire rolled her eyes despite herself, while Ethan adjusted the inhaler beside Noah's pillow. The simple movement looked so natural it almost hurt to watch. Noah yawned heavily before squinting up at Ethan. Will you still come tomorrow? Ethan hesitated only a second. Yeah, buddy. I will. Noah finally relaxed against the pillow again. Okay. Within minutes, he drifted back to sleep while the motel room fell quiet except for the heater and soft wind outside. Ethan remained sitting beside the bed longer than necessary, watching Noah breathe steadily beneath the blankets. Claire stood near the small table gripping her untouched coffee cup, unable to look away from him. Because no man had ever sat beside Noah's bed like that before. No man had ever stayed. Ethan finally stood slowly and rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. He is a good kid. Claire nodded carefully. Yeah. Ethan smiled faintly. Funny too. He gets that from me. Definitely not from me. The words slipped out naturally before Ethan suddenly paused. Claire felt her heartbeat stumble. Ethan looked down briefly like he realized something about the sentence himself, but not enough to fully understand it yet. Then his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. The warmth inside the room disappeared almost instantly. Ethan pulled out the phone, and Claire noticed his expression change the second he read the screen. Cold. Controlled. Billionaire Ethan Walker returning piece by piece. He declined the call immediately. Seconds later it rang again. Same number. Ethan sighed quietly. I should take this. Claire crossed her arms. Your mother? Ethan looked surprised. How did you know? Because she still knows exactly how to ruin us, Claire thought silently. Instead, she only shrugged. Lucky guess. Ethan stepped outside onto the balcony with the phone pressed against his ear, while Claire remained near the window pretending not to listen. But the motel walls were thin. Victoria Walker's voice carried sharply even through the storm. Where are you? Ethan's tone stayed calm. Busy. You missed the merger dinner. I know. Ethan, this deal affects thousands of employees and half the board is already questioning your priorities after the Denver situation. Claire frowned slightly. Denver. Ethan lowered his voice further. Do not do this tonight. Then come home. Silence followed. Then Victoria spoke again, colder now. Who is the woman? Claire stopped breathing entirely. Outside, Ethan stared into the falling snow for several long seconds before answering quietly. Someone I should have never lost. Claire's eyes filled unexpectedly before she looked away from the window too fast. Outside, Victoria's voice sharpened instantly. Ethan. Good night, mother. He ended the call. When Ethan stepped back inside a minute later, the air between them felt different somehow. More fragile. More dangerous. Claire moved toward the table quickly, needing distance. You should go before the roads freeze again. Ethan studied her carefully. You heard that conversation. Hard not to. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket slowly. My family complicates things. Claire laughed softly under her breath. That is one way to describe them. Ethan frowned slightly at the bitterness in her voice. Claire, what really happened when you left? The question landed heavily between them. Claire looked toward sleeping Noah instinctively. Ethan noticed immediately. Always observant. Always too observant with her. Then his eyes drifted toward the chair beside the bed where Noah's small backpack had fallen partially open. Something inside caught Ethan's attention instantly. A worn stuffed bear. And tucked into the bear's side pocket, the missing half of an old Polaroid photograph. Ethan stared at the torn Polaroid inside Noah's backpack like the world had suddenly tilted beneath him. Claire's breath caught instantly when she realized what he was looking at. Too late. Ethan stepped closer. Slowly, carefully pulling the photograph free from the pocket of the stuffed bear. His hands visibly stilled the moment the two torn edges connected perfectly inside his mind. One half in his wallet. One half hidden beside Noah's bed for years. The picture showed a younger Claire laughing beneath summer sunlight at Silver Lake, while Ethan stood behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist. 24 years old. In love. Completely unaware of how quickly life could break apart. Ethan looked up at Claire slowly. His voice barely existed when he spoke. Why does your son have this? Claire could not answer. Fear closed around her throat instantly. Ethan's eyes shifted back toward sleeping Noah. The dark hair. The eyelashes. The little crease between his brows. Suddenly, all the pieces he ignored began fitting together in horrifying clarity. Ethan looked at Claire again, and this time there was something shattered inside his expression. Claire, her eyes filled immediately. Do not. How old is he? Silence. Ethan stepped closer. Claire. She crossed her arms tightly around herself like it could somehow protect her from what was happening. 8. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The math hit him instantly. 8 years old. 9 years gone. One missing future. He is mine. It was not a question. Claire finally broke. Tears slipped down her face before she could stop them. Ethan stared at her in complete disbelief, breathing unevenly now. "You had my son," his voice cracked sharply. "And you never told me?" Noah stirred slightly in bed at the rising emotion in Ethan's voice. Claire immediately lowered hers. "Please." Ethan turned away suddenly, running both hands through his hair while trying to process the impossible weight of what he had just learned. He looked like a man watching his entire life rearrange itself in real time. "I looked for you for 2 years," he whispered hoarsely. "I hired investigators. I called every hospital in Denver after you disappeared. I thought maybe you were dead." Claire wiped at her tears helplessly. "Your mother came to see me." Ethan froze completely. Slowly, he turned back toward her. Claire laughed bitterly through tears. "You really did not know." "Know what?" "That she threatened me." Ethan stared at her silently. Claire's voice trembled now from years of buried exhaustion finally surfacing. "She told me your family would destroy my life if I stayed. She said you would resent me once your career collapsed because of me. Because of the baby." Ethan looked physically sick hearing the words. "Claire." "I was 25 and terrified," she whispered. "I had no money. No family left. And your mother made it very clear that people like me did not belong in your world." Ethan's jaw tightened painfully. "So you decided for me? I thought I was protecting you. You took away 8 years of my son's life." The hurt in his voice cut deeper than anger ever could. Claire lowered her head instantly, because he was right. Every terrible part of him was right. Silence filled the motel room except for the heater and soft winter wind outside. Then suddenly Noah's sleepy voice broke through the darkness. "Mom." Both of them turned immediately. Noah sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes while clutching the stuffed bear against his chest. His small gaze moved nervously between Claire's tears and Ethan's shattered expression. "Why are you both crying?" Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Ethan looked at Noah for a long moment, and something inside him visibly changed. The anger disappeared first, then the shock. What remained was something quieter, deeper, love arriving all at once without permission. Ethan slowly walked toward the bed and knelt in front of Noah until they were eye level. His voice trembled slightly when he finally spoke. "Hey, buddy." Noah blinked sleepily. "Yeah." Ethan looked at the little boy like he was seeing the most important thing in the world for the very first time. Then softly, almost like he was afraid to breathe too hard and lose the moment, Ethan asked, "Do you know what a dad is?" Noah blinked sleepily at Ethan's question while the motel room seemed to hold its breath around them. Claire stood frozen beside the table, tears still shining in her eyes, terrified of what came next. Ethan remained kneeling beside the bed, his expression softer than she had ever seen before. Noah hugged the stuffed bear closer against his chest. "A dad," he repeated quietly. Ethan nodded once. Noah thought seriously for a moment in the way children always do when trying to explain something adults complicate too much. "A dad is supposed to stay," he finally whispered. The words hit Ethan like a knife straight through the heart. Claire saw it happen in real time. The guilt, the grief, the unbearable realization of everything he had missed. Ethan swallowed hard and glanced down briefly before looking back at Noah. "Yeah," he said softly. "He is." Noah tilted his head curiously. "I do not have one." Claire closed her eyes instantly while Ethan's entire face broke apart for one painful second. Then very carefully, like he was handling something fragile and sacred, Ethan reached out and adjusted the blanket around Noah's shoulders. "You do now?" Silence filled the room. Noah stared at him in confusion at first. Then slowly his sleepy eyes widened. "Wait." He looked toward Claire immediately. "Mom." Tears slipped down Claire's face as she nodded once. "Barely." Noah looked back at Ethan again. "You are my dad." Ethan laughed softly through tears of his own. "Yeah, buddy." Noah blinked several times, trying to process it. "For real? For real?" Another silence followed before Noah suddenly asked the most heartbreaking question of all. "Then why were you gone so long?" Ethan looked toward Claire briefly before answering honestly. "Because I did not know you existed." Noah studied his face carefully like he was deciding whether to trust the answer. Then quietly he asked, "Would you have stayed?" Ethan did not hesitate. Every single day. Noah's eyes filled unexpectedly before he climbed out of bed and wrapped his small arms around Ethan's neck. Ethan caught him instantly, holding his son tightly for the first time in his life, while emotion finally overwhelmed him completely. Claire covered her mouth as Ethan buried his face against Noah's shoulder and cried silently. 9 years of lost birthdays, lost Christmas mornings, lost bedtime stories, all collapsing into this one impossible moment inside a cheap roadside motel. Noah hugged him tighter. "It is okay," he whispered softly. "You are here now." Ethan laughed shakily against his son's hair. "Yeah," he whispered back. "I am." Morning sunlight spilled softly across fresh snow the next day, turning the world outside bright gold and white. The storm had finally passed. Claire stood near the motel window holding a cup of coffee while watching Ethan and Noah outside beside the repaired Taurus. Noah sat proudly on Ethan's shoulders wearing Ethan's expensive knit beanie pulled too low over his eyes, while Ethan pretended to lose balance in the snow just to hear him laugh harder. The sound drifted through the cold morning air like something Claire thought she had lost forever. Home. Ethan glanced toward the motel window suddenly and caught Claire watching them. Their eyes met through the glass. No walls this time. No fear. Just truth. A few minutes later, Ethan walked back inside, carrying Noah's backpack over one shoulder, while Noah held his hand tightly, like he already knew exactly where he belonged. Ethan stopped in front of Claire quietly. "I cannot fix the years I missed." Claire looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "I know." Ethan reached into his wallet slowly and pulled out the faded half of the Polaroid. Noah immediately pulled the other half from his stuffed bear pocket. Together, they fit the torn picture back into one complete memory for the first time in nearly a decade. Ethan smiled softly at Claire. "Maybe we stop tearing things apart now." Claire let out a trembling laugh through tears before finally stepping closer to him. Noah grinned between them. "So, does this mean we are a family now?" Ethan looked at Claire first, really looked at her. The girl he loved beside Silver Lake. The woman who survived everything after. Then he squeezed Noah's hand gently and answered the question all three of them had been waiting years to hear. "Yeah, buddy," he said softly. "I think it does."